They came from the mists of the north, where the seas are restless and the winters long. From rugged coasts and hidden fjords, men and women shaped by wind and wave set sail into the unknown. To their enemies, they were raiders cloaked in terror. To themselves, they were explorers, farmers, storytellers, and seekers of destiny. Their story is not only one of conquest, but of courage, imagination, and a deep bond with the natural world. This is the rise and fall of the Vikings. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's somewhat comforting to imagine all of us, scattered across the globe, quietly unwinding together. So, breathe deeply, settle in, and allow the mysteries of time and space to cradle your imagination. For in the quiet hours of the night, under the same stars watched by our ancestors, the secrets of long-lost civilizations await, patiently, quietly, like ancient stars still shining from light years away. Let's begin. Close your eyes and picture the world at the edge of the northern seas, long before the Vikings became a name whispered with awe and fear across Europe. The air is sharp with the tang of salt water, the wind cool against your skin. You stand on a rocky shore where waves surge and retreat endlessly, their rhythm as old as time itself. Behind you, pine forests stretch into the distance, their trunks tall and straight, their branches sighing in the wind like a great choir. Farther still, mountains rise with jagged dignity, their crowns wrapped in snow that gleams even under the pale light of winter. This was the land of the Norse, a land of contrast and endurance, where beauty and hardship danced in equal measure. The people who lived here were shaped by this landscape. In winter, snow blanketed the earth, silencing the forests and sealing rivers with ice. The days grew short, the nights stretched long, and darkness lingered like a heavy cloak. Families huddled in longhouses, warmed by fire and bodies, telling stories to pass the endless hours. Food was rationed carefully, for every family knew that a poor harvest in summer or an unforgiving frost could spell hunger during the long, cold months. Survival here meant resilience, foresight, and above all, community. When summer arrived, the land awakened with startling brilliance. Meadows burst into colour with wildflowers, rivers ran fast with snowmelt, and the air filled with the hum of bees and the calls of birds. Farmers worked tirelessly, sowing barley, rye, and oats, tending cattle and sheep, and making use of every precious hour of daylight. The sun itself seemed reluctant to set, often hovering just above the horizon well into the night. To live in Scandinavia was to live with extremes of dark and light, cold and warmth, scarcity and abundance. These rhythms etched themselves into the hearts of the people, teaching them patience, endurance, and appreciation for the fleeting joys of life. The coastline, indented with fjords and dotted with islands, was both a blessing and a challenge. The fjords cut deep into the land, their waters calm and sheltered, perfect for harbours. Yet they also invited storms, sudden and violent, rolling in from the open sea. Those who lived near the coasts grew skilled in reading the water, watching the colour of the sky, the shape of the clouds, and the behaviour of birds to predict weather. The sea was dangerous, but it was also generous, offering fish in abundance, cod, herring, and salmon, that could be eaten fresh, dried, or smoked to last through winter. In a land where farming alone could not sustain life, the sea became the lifeline of the people. The forests too gave their gifts. Timber was essential for homes, ships, and tools. Birch provided bark that could be used for kindling or containers. Pine resin served as glue and waterproofing. Animals roamed the woods, elk, deer, and boar, hunted for meat and hides. Yet the forests were more than a resource. They were places of mystery, places where stories of spirits and hidden beings grew. In the hush beneath tall trees, one might imagine the presence of unseen watchers, creatures from tales passed down through generations. The land was never merely backdrop. It was alive, filled with forces both natural and supernatural. Across this landscape, small communities formed. A typical settlement might consist of a cluster of farms, each with its longhouse at the centre. These longhouses were marvels of practical design, timber frames covered with turf or thatch, their interiors dark but warm, smoke from the central hearth curling upward and seeping through the roof. Families slept side by side on raised wooden platforms, sharing warmth, while livestock often sheltered in adjoining spaces, their presence adding both heat and security. Within these walls, life unfolded, meals shared, crafts made, stories told. The people of these northern lands were not only farmers and hunters, but also craftsmen. They worked iron into tools and weapons, carved wood into intricate designs, and wove wool into warm clothing. Women spun and dyed threads, often in rich colors, and wove them into fabrics decorated with patterns that reflected both skill and symbolism. Jewelry of silver and bronze adorned many, not only as decoration, but also as expressions of status and identity. Even in such a demanding environment, there was room for beauty, creativity, and meaning. The harshness of the land bred strength, but it also inspired imagination. The thunder that rolled across the mountains was not simply weather, it was the hammer of Thor. The flickering lights of the aurora borealis were not merely natural phenomena, they were fires from the halls of the gods. The crashing of waves could be heard as whispers of Jörmungandr, the great serpent said to encircle the world. The Norse worldview was deeply tied to their environment, their myths and stories reflections of the forces they encountered daily. In the biting cold, in the sudden storm, in the fleeting brilliance of summer light, they saw the hand of the divine. Picture now a quiet evening in a Norse village. The air outside is cool, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold as the sun dips low. Smoke rises from the chimneys of turf-roofed halls, carrying the scent of peat and wood. Inside one such hall, families gather around a hearth. The fire glows warmly, casting flickering shadows across timber beams. A child leans close to a grandparent, listening to tales of gods and heroes, of battles fought long ago, of voyages yet to come. Outside, animals settle into pens, their movements soft against the murmur of the wind. Beyond the village, the forest darkens, and the sea whispers steadily against the shore. It was from this land, a land of hardship and wonder, of cold winters and radiant summers, that the Viking Age was born. The people of Scandinavia were forged in its challenges, strengthened by its gifts, and inspired by its mysteries. They learned to endure, to create, to believe, and to dream. And when the time came to look beyond their fjords and fields, to set their eyes on distant horizons, it was this land that had prepared them. The northern lands, both beautiful and demanding, shaped the spirit that would one day carry the Norse far from their homes, across seas, and into the chronicles of history. It all began here, in the quiet power of a landscape that was as much teacher as it was home. The land of the North was not only a place of forests, mountains, and seas. It was also a world infused with stories, with unseen forces and ancient truths whispered through wind and water. For the Norse, the natural world and the spiritual world were inseparable, and from their imaginations blossomed one of the richest mythologies ever told. Close your eyes and picture the northern sky on a winter's night. The stars shine bright and cold, scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Suddenly, bands of green and violet ripple across the heavens, the aurora borealis. To us, it may be explained by science, by solar winds and charged particles. But to the Norse, such lights were the dancing fires of the gods, or the reflections of warriors riding across the sky. Every flicker, every rumble of thunder, every sudden gust of wind held meaning. Myth was not distant, it was woven into the fabric of daily life. At the heart of Norse belief stood Yggdrasil, the great ash tree, vast and eternal. Its roots burrowed deep into the underworld, its branches stretched high into the realm of the gods, and its trunk bound all of creation together. To imagine Yggdrasil was to imagine the cosmos itself, a living axis that connected every realm. Around it lay the 9 worlds, a vision of existence both vast and intimate. There was Asgard, the shining home of the gods, Midgard, the middle world of humankind, and Jotunheim, the wild land of giants. There was Niflheim, the icy realm of darkness, and Muspelheim, the fiery world of flame. The 9 worlds pulsed with energy, all was in tension, all was in motion. The gods themselves reflected the complexity of life. Odin, the All-Father, was wise yet enigmatic, a seeker of knowledge who gave up an eye in exchange for wisdom and hung himself upon Yggdrasil to grasp the secrets of the runes. He was both warlord and wanderer, king and mystic. Thor, his son, wielded the mighty hammer Mjolnir, protector of gods and humans alike. His thunder shook the skies, his strength defended the fragile order against chaos. Yet he was also approachable, a god beloved by farmers and common folk, for he represented not only power, but also protection. Freya, goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, brought abundance to the fields and passion to the heart. She too was a warrior, claimed half the fallen warriors for her hall, sharing them with Odin. Loki, the trickster, was ever-shifting, clever, mischievous, and sometimes cruel. He was both ally and enemy, a reminder that chaos is never far away. Together, these gods and many others formed a pantheon that reflected the world's contradictions: beauty and terror, wisdom and folly, order and disorder. The stories of these gods were not told simply for amusement. They offered guidance and understanding in a world that was often unpredictable. In the thunder of storms, people heard Thor's hammer protecting them. In the silence of the woods, they felt the presence of spirits. Life and death, abundance and famine, victory and loss, all were explained through myth. Yet perhaps most striking of all was the Norse acceptance of fate. The Norns, mysterious weavers of destiny, spun the threads of every life at the roots of Yggdrasil. Even the gods themselves were not free from fate. The Vikings lived with a deep awareness of mortality, but it was not despair that this knowledge brought. It was courage. To know that one's end was woven long before it arrived meant that bravery, honor, and the pursuit of glory mattered more than fear. This belief shone most vividly in the idea of Valhalla. Those who fell bravely in battle were chosen by the Valkyries, fierce maidens of Odin, and carried to his great hall. There they feasted and trained, preparing for the final battle at the end of time, Ragnarok. But Valhalla was not the only destiny. Others might go to Folkvangr, the meadow of Freya, or to Hell, a realm of shadow, not of fire and torment, but of quiet stillness, a place where most ordinary lives found their rest. Ragnarok loomed large in Norse imagination, the day when gods and giants would clash, when the world would burn and be drowned, when even Odin and Thor would fall. Yet, from destruction would come rebirth, a new world rising from the sea, green and fertile. This cycle of death and renewal echoed the rhythms of the northern land, the long, dark winters giving way to summer's return. To the Norse, nothing was permanent, not even the gods themselves. And within that impermanence lay a kind of peace. Religion was not confined to grand temples. Sacred groves, waterfalls and stones were places of worship. offerings of food, weapons, or jewelry were cast into lakes and bogs, gifts to the unseen. Ceremonies took place in simple wooden halls, where sacrifices were made to ensure fertility, victory, or safe voyages. Priests and priestesses guided these rituals, but faith was woven into every family, every farm, every voyage across the sea. Runes, carved into wood, bone, or stone, carried both practical and mystical power. They were letters, yes, but also symbols of deeper meaning. A rune might mark ownership, tell a story, or invoke protection. Even today, runestones stand across Scandinavia, their carvings weathered but enduring, silent storytellers of belief and memory. Imagine now a winter's night in a Viking hall. The fire crackles, shadows dance on wooden walls, and outside the wind howls across the frozen earth. Inside, an elder recites the story of Thor's battle with the great serpent Jormungandr, of Odin's endless search for wisdom, of Loki's mischief that always leads to sorrow. Children listen wide-eyed, their imaginations carrying them into realms of gods and monsters. These stories, told by firelight, were not only entertainment, they were lessons, reassurance, and reminders that even in the vast unknown, there was order, there was meaning, and there was courage to be found. As the embers fade and families drift to sleep, the myths linger in the air like smoke, weaving themselves into dreams. For the Norse, mythology was not distant from life, it was life. It explained the thunder, gave purpose to the stars, and offered comfort in the face of death. And in this world of gods, giants, and spirits, the people of the North found not only stories, but also strength. From these beliefs, the Viking spirit grew, brave in the face of fate, resilient against hardship, and forever yearning to explore what lay beyond the horizon. Their mythology was not only the root of their courage, but also the foundation of their identity. It was this worldview, steeped in wonder and inevitability, that would guide them as they launched their first daring raids across foreign shores. Picture a quiet monastery perched on the edge of a windswept island in the North Sea. The year is 793 AD. Monks move slowly through cloisters, their chants rising and falling in rhythm with the tide. Outside, the gulls wheel above the surf, their cries sharp against the steady crash of waves. All seems peaceful, until dark shapes appear on the horizon. Long, narrow vessels gliding silently across the water. Their prows rise like beasts, carved with dragon heads that gleam in the sun. Within moments, calm is shattered by shouts, the clash of steel, and the flames of burning thatch. The monastery at Lindisfarne, once a sanctuary of prayer and learning, has become the first great victim of Viking fury. It is here, with this sudden storm from the north, that many historians mark the beginning of the Viking Age. Yet in truth, its roots ran deeper, born long before that infamous day. The Norse people had been exploring, trading, and raiding for generations, but now their actions would echo across the world. What drove them to set sail, leaving behind the familiar fjords and fields of Scandinavia? Part of the answer lay in the land itself. While beautiful, it could not always provide enough to sustain a growing population. Harsh winters, limited farmland, and cycles of famine pushed many to seek new opportunities elsewhere. To survive meant to adapt, and for the Norse, adaptation meant taking to the sea. The sea offered both possibility and peril. It carried them to distant shores where wealth could be found, whether through trade or plunder. It also tested their courage, for storms and shipwrecks were constant threats. Yet the Vikings were uniquely prepared for this life. Their longships, slender and strong, were marvels of design, shallow drafted so they could sail upriver, swift enough to overtake prey, sturdy enough to cross oceans. With these vessels, Even the most distant horizons seemed within reach. But the motivations of the Vikings were not purely material. Honor and reputation were central to their culture. To achieve glory, one had to be bold, and what greater stage for boldness than a raid upon wealthy monasteries and undefended towns? The stories of such feats spread quickly, enhancing the status of those who dared. In a world where fame could outlast life itself, courage was a kind of immortality. The first raids were sudden and shocking. Monasteries like Lindisfarne were not only spiritual centers, but also treasuries of gold, silver, and sacred relics. Their remote locations made them vulnerable, and their inhabitants were unarmed men of peace. For the Vikings, these holy places were easy targets. News of their attacks spread across Europe like wildfire, filling chronicles with descriptions of heathens who struck from the sea with terrifying speed. To the Christian monks who recorded these events, the Norse were scourges sent by God as punishment for sin. To the Vikings themselves, it was opportunity seized, wealth won, and renown gained. Yet raiding was only one part of the dawn. Alongside the sword, the Norse carried goods for trade: furs, walrus ivory, amber, and iron. In exchange, they sought silver, silks, wine, and spices. Early voyages established networks that would expand across centuries, linking Scandinavia not just to neighboring lands, but to the farthest reaches of Europe and beyond. The Vikings were as much merchants as marauders, as much explorers as conquerors. The dawn of the Viking Age was also a time of first encounters. Imagine the bewilderment of an English monk, seeing ships glide onto the beach, men leaping ashore in strange armor, their hair braided, their shields painted. To those who faced them, the Vikings seemed otherworldly, fierce, alien, unstoppable. Yet the Norse too must have looked with equal curiosity upon the monasteries, their walls filled with books, their halls adorned with golden crosses, their quiet order so unlike the wild rhythms of the north. These encounters were collisions of culture as much as they were acts of violence. As raids spread, so too did fear. Along the coasts of England, Ireland, and Frankish lands, watchtowers were built, warnings sounded, and prayers multiplied. Kings scrambled to defend their shores, often unsuccessfully, for the longships could strike almost anywhere. Villages that slept peacefully one night might awaken to fire and steal the next. The unpredictability of the raids gave the Norse an aura of invincibility. They came not in vast armies, but in swift bands, striking where least expected, disappearing back to the sea before resistance could gather. But while the chronicles spoke of terror, the reality was more complex. For every monastery burned, there were also markets where Vikings exchanged goods, friendships forged in trade, and alliances made through marriage. The dawn of the Viking Age was not merely an age of destruction. It was an age of contact, of movement, of expansion. Behind the raids and voyages lay the pulse of Norse society. Young men sought glory and wealth abroad, while elders managed farms and families at home. Women, too, played vital roles, overseeing households, trading goods, and sometimes even joining expeditions. The dawn of the Viking Age was not only the story of warriors, but of entire communities, bound together by ambition, necessity, and belief in fate. Imagine once more a Norse village, the sea glittering at its edge. Young men sharpen their weapons, their eyes filled with anticipation. Families gather to bid farewell, not knowing if their loved ones will return. A chieftain raises his voice, calling upon the gods for protection, offering sacrifice to ensure safe passage. The ships push off, their oars dipping into the water in unison, their sails catching the wind. Behind them lies the quiet farmstead. Ahead lies the wide world. In this moment, the Viking Age begins in earnest, not with a single raid, but with a spirit of restless courage that will carry these people far beyond the northern horizon. The dawn of the Viking Age was a time of fear and fascination, of violence and connection, of endings and beginnings. To those who faced their raids, the Vikings seemed like a storm, unpredictable and merciless. To themselves, they were seafarers seeking survival, wealth and honor. And as the years passed, the world would come to know their name not only as raiders, but as traders, settlers, and explorers, a people whose legacy would reach across continents and centuries. From Lindisfarne's burning halls to distant markets in Frankish towns, the dawn of the Viking Age lit a fire that would blaze for generations. The Norse had stepped onto the stage of history, and they would not easily be forgotten. Close your eyes and imagine dawn breaking over a northern fjord. The water is still, its surface like polished glass, broken only by a faint ripple as a wooden vessel glides forward. The air is cool, scented with salt and pine. Slowly, the rising sun gilds the sea with liquid gold, and the sleek outline of a longship emerges, its sail furled, its oars dipping in rhythmic unison. To witness such a sight was to understand why the Vikings were masters of the sea. For it was on these slender ships that they carried their world across oceans and rivers alike. The Viking longship was more than just a vessel. It was a triumph of craftsmanship, ingenuity, and adaptation to the environment. Long and narrow, with a shallow draft, it could slip through coastal waters and glide up rivers where other ships would run aground. Its keel gave it stability, while its overlapping planks, carefully riveted with iron nails, allowed it to flex with the waves. The clinker-built design, a hallmark of Scandinavian shipbuilding, combined strength with surprising lightness, enabling crews to drag their vessels across land when needed. A Viking longship was not a burden to its sailors. It was an extension of their spirit, swift and alive beneath them. Each longship bore a carved prow, often shaped into the head of a dragon or serpent. These figures were not mere decoration. They were guardians, intended to ward off sea spirits and strike fear into enemies. Imagine standing on a distant shore and seeing such shapes rise from the mist, dragon-headed ships gliding silently toward you. It was as much psychological weapon as practical design. The hull was painted in tar to resist water, sometimes brightened with shields lashed to the sides, their colors gleaming in sunlight or firelight. The sail, often made from wool, painstakingly woven and dyed with earthy reds or browns, was the beating heart of these ships. When the wind filled its canvas, the longship surged forward with astonishing speed, capable of reaching 10 knots or more. With both sail and oars, these vessels could travel hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks, shrinking the distances between Scandinavia and lands once thought unreachable. Navigation at sea was both art and instinct. The Vikings did not possess compasses as we know them, but they read the world around them with extraordinary precision. By day, they used the sun's arc across the sky, marking its path with the aid of sunstones, crystals that revealed the sun's direction even on cloudy days. By night, they watched the stars, especially the steady point of Polaris, guiding them across open waters. The color of the sea, the flight of seabirds, the drift of clouds, even the taste of salt in the air became clues to their position. To modern eyes, such methods might seem uncertain, but to the Norse, they were second nature, honed by lifetimes lived in rhythm with nature. Crews on these longships were not vast armies, but tight-knit groups of warriors, traders, or settlers. A typical vessel might carry 30 to 60 men, each responsible for both rowing and maintaining the ship. Life aboard was simple and demanding. Men slept on the deck under the open sky, wrapped in cloaks for warmth. They ate dried fish, bread, and porridge cooked in iron cauldrons. When storms rose, they baled water relentlessly, their muscles straining against oars as waves crashed over the gunwales. Yet there was also camaraderie, laughter, and song. The ship was both home and pathway, carrying its crew into danger, discovery, and destiny. But the longship was not the only vessel of the Norse. The Nar, broader and deeper, was the merchant ship, designed to carry goods rather than warriors. With room for cargo, livestock, and families, the Nar made settlement possible in distant lands such as Iceland and Greenland. Where the longship was a blade, the Nar was a cradle, carrying life and community across oceans. Together, these vessels enabled the expansion of the Viking world, binding distant shores into a single web of travel and trade. Imagine now a voyage setting out from a fjord. The ship rests in calm water, its crew busy with preparations. Supplies are loaded, oars secured, and sails checked for strength. Families gather on the shore, their faces lined with both pride and worry. As the vessel pushes off, the rowers fall into rhythm, the sound of wood on water steady as a heartbeat. The prow cuts the waves, the sail rises, and soon the coastline drifts away, replaced by the endless expanse of sea. For those aboard, the horizon is not a limit, but an invitation. Journeys could be perilous. Storms could arise suddenly, turning calm seas into roaring chaos. Men bailed frantically as waves threatened to swamp the vessel. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled, and rain lashed the crew. Yet they pressed on, guided by faith in their gods, in their skills, and in their ship. Many sagas speak of voyages where men endured hunger, cold, and fear, yet emerged triumphant, their longships delivering them safely to new shores. The resilience of both crew and craft was remarkable. For those on land, the sudden appearance of these ships was unforgettable. They could glide upriver silently, emerging like shadows before striking with speed and precision. Or they might appear on distant horizons, sails full, the sun catching on painted shields. The longship was not only a tool of travel, it was a symbol of Viking power, a moving emblem of their mastery over sea and storm. Archaeology has revealed much about these ships. The Oseberg ship, buried in Norway around 834 AD, preserved in astonishing detail, shows the artistry and care given to construction. Carved with intricate patterns, fitted with fine craftsmanship, it was not only functional, but beautiful. Standing beside such a ship today, one can feel the awe of its presence, the grace of its lines, the strength of its frame. To think that vessels like these crossed the wild North Atlantic is to marvel at both human ingenuity and courage. By mastering the sea, the Vikings mastered their destiny. Their ships carried them not only to Britain and Ireland, but to the rivers of France, the coasts of Spain, the markets of Constantinople, and even the shores of North America. Without the longship, there would have been no Viking Age. It was their greatest tool, their greatest weapon, and their greatest companion. As twilight falls, picture once more a longship at rest. It lies at anchor in a sheltered bay, its sail furled, its oars secured. The crew sleeps on deck, their breaths rising in unison beneath the starlit sky. The water laps gently against the hull, as if whispering lullabies to the weary. In the morning, the sail will rise again, and the journey will continue. But for now, in the quiet of the night, the ship itself seems alive, a guardian of dreams, a vessel of both memory and possibility. The Vikings were masters of the sea not simply because they built ships. They were masters because they learned to read the world around them, to trust in their craft, and to embrace the horizon with courage. Their longships were not merely wood and sail. They were symbols of freedom, ambition, and the restless spirit that carried the Norse far beyond the lands of their birth. Imagine the stillness of a small coastal village at dawn. Smoke curls lazily from thatched roofs. Fishermen ready their nets, and the gentle murmur of prayer rises from a church where monks begin their morning chants. Suddenly, the peace is broken. From the sea, ships glide swiftly toward shore, their prows carved into dragons and serpents, their sails taut with wind. Men leap into the shallows, shields raised, weapons flashing in the pale light. The cry of alarm rises too late, for the raiders are upon them. Gold, silver, livestock, and captives are seized. Flames engulf houses, and the invaders vanish as quickly as they came, leaving only silence and smoke behind. This was the image that spread across Europe as the Viking Age unfolded. Fierce raiders descending like storms from the sea, their sudden attacks striking terror into the hearts of kings, priests, and peasants alike. And indeed, the Vikings were formidable warriors, their raids infamous for their swiftness and brutality. Yet to see them only as marauders is to miss half their story. For just as they wielded the sword, they also carried scales and silver, trading across continents and weaving connections that shaped the medieval world. The Vikings were raiders and traders both, and often they were one and the same. The first raids shocked Europe. Monasteries rich in treasure but poor in defences became prime targets. Gold and silver reliquaries, jeweled manuscripts, and sacred vessels were stripped from altars and carried off across the sea. To the monks who recorded these events, the raiders were godless heathens, scourges sent to punish sinful humanity. Their chronicles are filled with horror, describing men with wild hair, strange tongues, and merciless eyes. Yet for the Vikings, such raids were not merely acts of cruelty. They were opportunities to gain wealth, prestige, and renown. In a society where reputation meant everything, a successful raid could elevate a man's standing for life, but raiding alone could not sustain them. The same ships that carried warriors also carried goods, and wherever the Norse landed, markets often followed. Silver was the lifeblood of their economy, and they sought it eagerly, trading furs from the forests of the north, walrus ivory from Arctic seas, and amber from Baltic shores. In return, they acquired silks from Byzantium, spices from the east, glassware from the Frankish lands, and coins from far-off markets. Viking traders ventured deep into the rivers of Russia, reaching as far as Constantinople and Baghdad, connecting the icy north to the warm deserts of the Middle East. Consider the bustling markets of Hedeby in Denmark, one of the great Viking trading centers. Here, the air was alive with noise, merchants calling out their wares, livestock bleating, the clang of blacksmiths' hammers. Stalls displayed furs, iron tools, jewelry, and woven cloth. Foreign traders mingled with locals, exchanging goods, news, and ideas. Arabic silver coins, known as dirhams, flowed into Viking hands, evidence of their far-reaching networks. To walk through such a market was to walk through a crossroads of the medieval world. The dual nature of the Vikings, raiders and traders, often blurred together. A band of warriors might sack a town one season, then return the next, not with swords but with goods to exchange. Some places feared their sails, others welcomed them for the wealth they brought. Kings and rulers, though wary, sometimes struck alliances, granting the Norse permission to trade in return for peace. Thus, the same people who could burn a monastery could also negotiate treaties, build markets, and settle towns. Silver hoards buried in the ground tell us much about this duality. Across Scandinavia, treasures have been unearthed, arm rings, coins, and ingots, carefully hidden, perhaps to be retrieved later or as offerings to the gods. These hoards show the scale of wealth that flowed through Viking hands, wealth not only won by the sword, but earned through trade. To the Norse, silver was more than money. It was a symbol of success, a sign of status, and often used as a form of loyalty and gift-giving. The raids themselves grew more ambitious as years passed. What began as small coastal strikes expanded into full invasions. Entire armies crossed the seas, occupying towns, demanding tribute and establishing settlements. Yet, alongside this violence, trading towns flourished, from York in England to Dublin in Ireland, places where Norse and local cultures blended. These towns became hubs of exchange, where goods, languages, and customs intertwined. Imagine standing in Dublin in the 9th century. The smell of tar and fish lingers in the air as ships dock at wooden piers. Traders haggle in a mixture of tongues, coins clink in purses, and smoke rises from smithies where weapons and tools are forged. Around you, homes of wattle and daub cluster along muddy streets, while churches rise beside Norse halls. Here, raiders and traders live side by side, their fates intertwined. It is important to remember that not all encounters were hostile. Many Vikings married into local families, their children bridging cultures. Some converted to Christianity, blending Norse beliefs with new faiths. Far from being only destroyers, they were also creators of connections, knitting together a world once fragmented by distance. Their legacy was not just in battle, but in the networks of commerce, culture, and kinship they left behind. Still, the fear of their raids never faded entirely. Even as they traded peacefully, stories of their ferocity lingered. To many, the word Viking was synonymous with terror. Their very presence could alter the course of kingdoms, forcing rulers to reorganize their defenses, strengthen their armies, and rethink their strategies. The Norse were catalysts of change, whether through plunder or trade. As twilight falls over a Viking encampment, the two sides of their nature can be seen clearly. Around one fire, warriors polish their swords and recount battles with fierce pride. Around another, merchants examine silver coins, weigh goods, and discuss journeys yet to come. The sound of laughter drifts across the camp, mingling with the steady murmur of the sea. For the Vikings, these paths were not opposites, but companions, two ways of achieving the same goals: survival, honor, and prosperity. The image of the raider, fierce and unstoppable, will always endure. Yet it is incomplete without the image of the trader, the diplomat, and the settler. Together, these identities made the Vikings what they were: adaptable, ambitious, and unafraid to grasp opportunity wherever it appeared. To reduce them to one role is to miss the full measure of their story. And so, as we look back on this chapter of their history, we see not only flames rising from monasteries, but also silver glittering in markets, ships laden with furs and amber, and families building lives in new lands. The Vikings were raiders, yes, but they were also bridge builders, their sails carrying not only war, but also exchange, connection, and transformation. Picture a longship gliding across a vast expanse of open sea. The sail swells with wind, the prow dips and rises with the rhythm of the waves, and the crew squints into the horizon. Behind them lies the rugged coastline of Scandinavia, familiar fjords and fields now fading from sight. Ahead lies the unknown, distant shores whispered of in stories, lands rumored to be rich and fertile. This moment, filled with both uncertainty and hope, captures the spirit of the Viking settlers and explorers who pushed the boundaries of their world further than almost anyone of their age. The Viking Age was not defined only by raids and battles. It was also an age of migration, settlement, and discovery. Driven by limited farmland, growing populations, and the lure of opportunity, many Norse families chose not the sword but the plough. They loaded their possessions, their livestock, and their hopes onto sturdy nars, the broad-bellied merchant ships designed for carrying weight, and set sail into the horizon. What they found would shape the story of the Norse in remarkable ways. The first great wave of expansion took them westward. By the late 9th century, settlers had reached the Faroe Islands, remote and windswept, their grassy slopes perfect for grazing sheep. From there, voyages pushed further to the volcanic island of Iceland. Imagine arriving upon those black sand shores for the first time, the air smelling of sulfur, mountains steaming with hidden fire, geysers erupting into the sky. To the Norse, Iceland seemed both harsh and miraculous, a land where winters were long and cold, but where valleys and meadows offered fertile ground for farms. Here, they built homesteads of turf and timber, established communities, and created one of the most remarkable cultural legacies of the Viking Age, the Icelandic sagas. In Iceland, democracy took root in a form unique for its time. The Althing, established around 930 AD, was a great assembly where chieftains and free men gathered to make laws and settle disputes. Under the wide northern sky, justice was spoken, decisions made, and stories shared. The Althing still exists today, one of the oldest parliaments in the world, a living testament to the governance and order the Norse brought with them to new lands. But Iceland was not the end. From its shores, brave explorers sailed even further west. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, voyaged across icy seas until he reached a new land he called Greenland. Though harsh and forbidding, with glaciers looming and storms frequent, Greenland offered fjords where farms could cling to the edges of habitable soil. Eric spoke of it glowingly, naming it Greenland in hopes of attracting settlers. And indeed, families followed, carving out lives at the very edge of survival. They raised cattle and sheep, built churches of stone, and even traded ivory from walrus tusks with Europe. From Greenland, the Norse gaze extended farther still. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed west and reached a place he called Vinland. Scholars believe this may have been somewhere along the coast of Newfoundland in North America. Imagine the wonder of stepping ashore on a land none of their ancestors had seen, rich with forests and wild grapes, far from the icy fjords of home. For a brief time, the Norse built small settlements there, but the challenges of distance, hostility from local peoples, and the strain of supply eventually forced them to abandon their outposts. Still, Leif Erikson's voyage remains one of the most extraordinary achievements of the Viking Age, the first known European encounter with North America, 5 centuries before Columbus. Settlement also spread eastward and southward. In the British Isles, Norse farmers built communities in Orkney, Shetland, and the Hebrides. In Ireland, they founded Dublin, which grew from a fortified base into a bustling town of trade and culture. In northern England, they established the Danelaw, a region where Norse customs and law mingled with Anglo-Saxon traditions. To walk through these lands was to hear a blend of languages, to see Norse jewelry beside Christian crosses, to feel the merging of 2 worlds into one. Exploration and settlement were not without hardship. The North Atlantic seas were unpredictable, storms fierce and sudden. Icebergs loomed in mist, currents pulled ships astray, and the cold could sap strength from even the hardiest sailor. Many voyages ended in shipwreck or starvation, their stories lost to the waves. Yet still they ventured forth, driven by necessity, hope, and the unshakable belief that beyond the horizon lay opportunity. For those who succeeded, new lives began. Imagine a Viking farmstead in Iceland, turf walls blending into the green hills, sheep grazing in meadows, smoke rising from the hearth within. Families work side by side, tending crops and animals, their days shaped by the seasons. At night, they gathered to tell stories, sagas of gods, heroes, and ancestors, preserving the memory of their people even as they built a future in new lands. These communities were not temporary camps, but enduring settlements, places where generations would live, love, and grow. The settlers carried their faith with them, but they also adapted. In Greenland, Christianity eventually took root, churches built beside old sacred sites, bells ringing across icy valleys. In Ireland and England, Norse settlers adopted aspects of local culture, blending languages, traditions, and faiths. The Viking Age was as much a story of integration as it was of invasion. Picture, for a moment, a Norse family setting out from their home. A mother gathers her children, wrapping them in cloaks. A father loads the last of their supplies onto the ship: tools, livestock, seeds for planting. Neighbours gather to bid them farewell, voices mixing with the sound of waves. The ship pushes off, oars dipping in rhythm, the horizon opening wide. Behind them lies the life they have known. Ahead lies uncertainty, danger and hope. Such was the courage of the settlers and explorers who carried the Viking spirit across seas and into history. In their quest for new lands, the Norse became more than raiders. They became pioneers, farmers, builders, and dreamers. Their settlements stretched the map of the known world, their voyages bridging continents, their sagas preserving the memory of their journeys. Even when some colonies failed, their courage endured, a legacy of exploration that would inspire generations to come. As night falls, picture a Viking ship anchored in a quiet bay, its crew resting after weeks at sea. The stars shimmer above, their constellations guiding men homeward or outward into the unknown. On the shore, a new settlement stirs, smoke from cooking fires, laughter of children, the lowing of cattle. In this blend of fragility and resilience, of hope and hardship, the essence of the Viking spirit shines clear. They were not content to remain bound by the limits of their land. They sought new horizons, and in doing so, they became settlers and explorers, shaping the course of history in ways both profound and enduring. Close your eyes and step away from the roar of battlefields and the creak of longships at sea. Instead, imagine a quiet valley nestled between rolling hills and deep forests in Scandinavia. The morning mist clings to the grass, dew sparkles on leaves, and the sound of a river drifts through the still air. Here stands a Viking farmstead, simple yet enduring, its turf walls blending with the land around it. Smoke rises gently from the roof as a family stirs awake, beginning another day. This is the heart of Viking society, not raids or voyages, but the rhythm of daily life, shaped by the land, the seasons, and the bonds between people. At the centre of Viking life was the longhouse. Built from timber, stone, and turf, it was both shelter and symbol, a place where family, servants, and sometimes animals lived together under one roof. Step inside, and you would find a single long room, dimly lit by narrow openings, warmed by a central hearth. Along the sides, raised wooden platforms served as beds by night and seating by day. The walls were hung with tools, shields, and sometimes tapestries woven in bright colours. The air smelled of smoke, wool, and food cooking slowly in iron pots. Here, stories were told, disputes settled, and bonds strengthened by firelight. Daily tasks were divided but deeply interdependent. Men tended fields, hunted, fished, and crafted tools, while women managed households, prepared food, spun wool, and wove cloth. Women also carried responsibility for farms when men were away on voyages, and they held considerable influence within the household. Archaeological finds show that many Viking women were buried with keys, symbols of their authority over home and property. Far from passive figures, women in Norse society were essential to its survival, and sometimes even warriors themselves. Farming was the backbone of existence. Barley, rye, and oats grew in the fields, harvested in summer, and stored carefully for winter. Livestock, sheep, cattle, goats, and pigs provided milk, meat, wool, and hides. Horses, small but sturdy, were prized for transport and prestige. Farming was labour-intensive, dictated by the seasons, ploughing in spring, harvesting in summer, slaughtering animals in autumn, and enduring the long, dark months of winter with stored supplies. Every task was communal, every hand needed. Yet life was not only toil. Festivals punctuated the year, celebrations tied to harvests, solstices, and sacred rituals. Imagine a feast in a great hall, long tables laden with roasted meat, bread, and ale brewed from barley and honey. Music fills the air as men and women sing old songs, their voices rising above the crackle of fire. Skalds, poets, and storytellers recite sagas of gods and heroes, their words weaving memory and meaning into the night. In these moments, joy balanced the hardships, and community became a shield against loneliness and fear. Children were raised to be part of this world from the moment they could walk. Boys learned to handle axes, herd animals, and fish, while girls were taught to weave, cook, and manage the household. Education was practical, grounded in the skills needed to survive, but it was also cultural. Children memorized sagas, learned runes, and absorbed the values of honor, courage, and loyalty. To grow up Viking was to inherit not only tools and tasks, but a way of seeing the world. Social structure shaped life beyond the household. At the top stood jarls, noble leaders with wealth, influence, and retinues of warriors. Below them were carls, the free farmers and craftsmen who formed the backbone of society. At the lowest tier were thralls, enslaved people captured in raids or born into servitude, who worked the hardest tasks on farms and in households. While thralls had few rights, some could earn freedom over time. This hierarchy reflected the practical needs of survival, but it also bound the community into a web of obligations and expectations. Law was central to maintaining order. Disputes were settled not only by violence, but by assemblies known as things. These gatherings, held in open-air fields or sacred sites, brought together free men to debate, decide, and pronounce justice. The thing was not only a court, but a parliament of sorts, where voices carried weight and agreements were honoured. Punishments ranged from fines to exile, and the emphasis was often on restoring balance rather than inflicting cruelty. Through the thing, the Norse built a sense of order amid a world that could often feel chaotic. Trade, too, wove through daily life. Even ordinary households might own goods from distant lands. Beads of glass from the Mediterranean, silks from Byzantium, silver coins from the Middle East. Markets brought communities together, places where farmers exchanged butter, cheese, and wool for tools, jewelry, and imported luxuries. The Norse were not isolated. They lived in a network of exchange, their horizons broader than their farms might suggest. Religion colored every aspect of existence. Before Christianity spread, offerings were made to the old gods, sacrifices of animals, gifts of food, sometimes even weapons buried in lakes or bogs. Each family honored its ancestors, believing their spirits lingered close, protecting or guiding the living. Everyday tasks were infused with ritual, from planting crops to setting out on voyages. To live was to exist within a tapestry of divine and natural forces, each thread woven tightly into daily rhythms. Yet even as traditions endured, change slowly crept in. Christian missionaries arrived in Scandinavia, bringing new beliefs, new practices, and new promises of salvation. Some resisted, clinging fiercely to the old gods. Others blended the two, adopting Christian symbols while still invoking Thor or Odin. Eventually, churches rose beside old sacred groves, bells ringing where once horns had sounded. For many families, this transition was not abrupt, but gradual, a blending of old and new within the fabric of daily life. Imagine once more that quiet Viking farmstead. The sun has set, the air cool and still. Inside the longhouse, the fire burns low, casting soft light across tired faces. A woman hums softly as she weaves, her spindle whirling gently. A man mends a tool by the hearth, his hands steady despite the long day. Children drift into sleep, curled beneath woolen blankets. Outside, the night deepens, stars scattered like silver across the sky. It is a scene of peace, of continuity, of life carried forward with quiet determination. Though we often remember the Vikings as fierce raiders or daring explorers, their true strength lay here, in the endurance of daily life, in the bonds of family, in the rhythms of farming, crafting, trading, and storytelling. These were the foundations upon which their voyages and victories were built. Without them, there would have been no ships, no sagas, no legacy at all. In the small details, the crackle of a hearth fire, the weight of a woven cloak, the laughter of children playing by a riverbank, we glimpse the heart of Viking society. It was not a world of endless conquest, but one of endurance, adaptation, and imagination. In their homes and halls, the Norse nurtured a spirit that would carry them across seas and centuries, leaving traces not only in chronicles of battle, but in the quiet persistence of ordinary life. Imagine a gathering place on a windswept plain. The air is filled with voices, men and women arriving from distant farms and villages, their cloaks snapping in the breeze. Horses stamp their hooves, dogs bark, and children cling to their mothers' skirts. At the center stands a chieftain, tall and broad-shouldered, his cloak fastened with a gleaming brooch. Around him gather warriors with shields strapped to their backs, their eyes alert, their hands resting casually on axe handles. This is not a battle. It is a meeting of power, a moment where alliances are made, rivalries sharpened, and the shape of kingdoms begins to emerge. Viking society was built upon a delicate balance of loyalty and ambition. At its heart lay the clan, extended families bound by blood and oath. Within each clan, leaders emerged, jarls, men of wealth and influence who commanded warriors and managed land. Beneath them were the farmers and craftsmen, while above all loomed the shifting figures of kings, their authority always tested by the strength of their followers. Unlike the rigid monarchies of medieval Europe, Viking leadership was fluid. A king might rule with broad influence one day and face rebellion the next. Power was earned, displayed, and constantly contested. Harald Fairhair, remembered as the first king to unite much of Norway, offers a glimpse into this process. According to saga, Harald vowed not to cut or comb his hair until he had brought all Norway under his rule. For years he fought rival chieftains, gathering followers with promises of wealth and land. Slowly, through war and negotiation, he forged a fragile unity. When at last his task was done, he washed, cut, and combed his hair, earning the name Fairhair. Whether legend or truth, his story reveals how leadership was built not only on might, but on vision, determination, and the ability to inspire loyalty. Yet kingship was never absolute. The Viking world was not one of unquestioned authority, but of negotiation. A ruler relied on the support of jarls and farmers, who expected rewards for their loyalty. Gold, silver, land, and spoils of war flowed from king to follower, binding them together in a web of obligation. If a king failed to provide, his power weakened. If he proved unjust, he could be challenged in the thing, the assembly of free men. In this balance lay both stability and fragility, a political order as shifting as the tides. Conflict was constant. Clans feuded over land, honor, and blood debts. Sagas tell of rivalries that spanned generations, each insult or injury demanding retribution. A stolen cow might spark a skirmish. A broken marriage promise might lead to years of violence. Blood feuds were not simply private quarrels, but matters that drew in entire communities. Honor was everything, and to let an insult go unanswered was unthinkable. Yet, even within these conflicts, There were rules, traditions, and avenues for resolution. Compensation in silver or goods might be agreed upon, restoring peace before violence consumed all. Beyond local disputes lay larger struggles. As Viking expansion grew, so too did their political ambitions. In England, Denmark, and elsewhere, Norse leaders sought to carve out realms for themselves. Rulers such as Sweyn Forkbeard and Knut the Great extended Viking influence far beyond Scandinavia, creating empires that spanned seas and cultures. Their rule brought both prosperity and strife, for blending Norse traditions with foreign lands was no easy task. Imagine the court of Canute in the early 11th century. The hall is vast, filled with both Norse warriors and English nobles. At one end sits the king, his crown gleaming, his cloak heavy with embroidery. Around him, voices mingle in a dozen languages, treaties are discussed, and gifts exchanged. Here stands the Viking world at its height, no longer simply raiders or settlers, but kings commanding respect across Europe. Yet such power was precarious, dependent on constant negotiation, force, and the fragile bonds of loyalty. Conflict also shaped the spiritual landscape. As Christianity spread, it became a source of both division and unity. Some kings embraced the new faith as a means of consolidating power, gaining allies among Christian rulers abroad. Others resisted, seeing conversion as betrayal of the old gods. In some regions, families were torn apart, one generation clinging to Thor, while the next prayed to Christ. Battles were fought not only for land, but for belief, each side convinced of the righteousness of its cause. The sagas preserve many tales of these struggles. Heroes and villains emerge, their deeds immortalized in verse. One might read of a warrior who defended his clan against overwhelming odds, or of a king who betrayed his followers for silver. These stories, though often embellished, reflect the reality of a world where honor and ambition drove men to both greatness and ruin. Yet amid the chaos of conflict, there was also order. The thing remained a cornerstone of governance, a place where disputes were aired, laws recited, and kings held accountable. Imagine a summer day when men gather beneath the open sky, standing in circles as speakers proclaim judgments. A hush falls as sentences are declared, and silver changes hands to settle disputes. In these moments, the Viking world showed its resilience, balancing violence with negotiation, ambition with responsibility. At home, families felt the weight of these struggles. A man might leave his farm to fight for his chieftain, leaving his wife and children to manage the land. A feud might erupt, pulling neighbors into conflict not of their making. Women, often overlooked in tales of battle, played vital roles in maintaining households, arranging marriages to forge alliances, and sometimes even avenging wrongs themselves. Society was not built by kings alone, but by countless individuals whose lives wove the fabric of community. As dusk falls over a Viking settlement, imagine a hall filled with voices. Warriors recount battles, boasting of their deeds. Farmers discuss harvests and disputes. Skalds recite poems of kings and heroes, their words mingling fact and legend. Outside, the wind carries the scent of sea and pine, a reminder that beyond every hall lies a world of both opportunity and threat. In this balance of power and vulnerability, the story of kings, clans, and conflict played out, shaping the destiny of the Norse. The Viking Age was never simply an age of conquest. It was an age of negotiation, rivalry, and ambition. Kings rose and fell, clans fought and reconciled, and conflict shaped the contours of society. Through it all, the Norse proved adaptable, resilient, and bound by the values of honor and loyalty. In the quiet of night, when the fires in the longhouse burn low, one can almost hear the echoes of those voices, kings pledging oaths, jarls swearing fealty, families whispering prayers to gods old and new. Their world was one of constant tension, yet within that tension lay vitality, strength, and the restless energy that carried them across seas and centuries. The story of the Vikings, like all great sagas, was not destined to last forever. Imagine the twilight of a long summer's day in Scandinavia. The sky glows with lingering light, the air carries the scent of pine and sea, and yet a faint chill creeps in, hinting at the season's end. In much the same way, the Viking Age, once blazing with energy and expansion, began to wane. Its decline was not sudden, but gradual, shaped by forces both within and beyond the Norse world. One of the greatest pressures came from abroad. In the early days of raids, monasteries and villages were easy prey, their defences minimal, their guardians few. But over time, the kingdoms of Europe adapted. Fortifications rose along rivers and coasts, watchtowers and bridges blocked access, and local militias grew stronger. Kings such as Alfred the Great in England developed new strategies, creating fortified towns known as burhs, linked together into networks of defence. No longer could longships strike with the same ease. Resistance awaited them on every shore. At the same time, the Norse faced powerful enemies. The Frankish Empire, once fractured, grew more cohesive, its rulers determined to resist the raiders. In England, the kingdoms of Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, though often divided, increasingly united against common threats. Battles once easily won became costly, and defeats grew more frequent. The image of Vikings as invincible warriors began to crack. Christianity too reshaped the Viking world. In earlier centuries, the Norse faith of Odin, Thor, and Freyja had bound communities together, offering courage and meaning. But missionaries, kings, and traders slowly brought the Christian cross to Scandinavian shores. Conversion was gradual, but its impact profound. Churches replaced sacred groves, and the rituals of baptism supplanted offerings at altars of stone. Some accepted the new faith willingly, drawn by its promises of eternal life and its connections to powerful Christian rulers abroad. Others resisted, clinging to the old gods, seeing conversion as a betrayal. Families and even clans were divided, one generation worshipping Christ, while the older still prayed to Thor. Over time, the old religion gave way, leaving behind memory and myth rather than living tradition. The spread of Christianity did more than change belief. It altered the very fabric of society. Kings who embraced the faith gained legitimacy in the eyes of Christian Europe, forging alliances through marriage and diplomacy. Yet this also tied them into new expectations, limiting the raiding and plundering that had once defined Viking power. The wild freedom of the early age was slowly replaced by structures of order and law more in line with the rest of Europe. Economic changes also played their part. For centuries, silver had flowed into Scandinavia, fueling trade and wealth. But by the 10th century, supplies from the Islamic world began to dwindle. Without this steady influx, Viking economies strained. Raiding still brought riches, but the risks grew greater, the rewards less certain. Trade remained important, but it could not always support the ambitions of kings and chieftains hungry for power. Internal divisions further weakened the Norse. Clans feuded, rival kings vied for dominance, and civil wars drained energy that might once have gone into exploration or conquest. Ambition that had once driven expansion now turned inward, fragmenting unity and sapping strength. In some regions, Viking settlers became less recognizably Norse. In England, Ireland, and Normandy, Norse communities blended with local populations. Languages mixed, customs merged, and identities shifted. The descendants of Vikings in Normandy, for example, became the Normans, adopting French language and culture while retaining the martial spirit of their ancestors. In 1066, it was these Normans, once Norsemen themselves, who would launch their own invasion of England, not as Vikings, but as conquerors under a new banner. Imagine a Viking chieftain in the late 10th century, sitting in his hall as winter winds howl outside. Once, his forefathers had sailed to foreign shores, returning with silver and stories of far-off lands. Now, his village is more settled, his people tied to fields, churches, and laws that mirror those of their neighbours. The thrill of distant horizons is replaced by the work of governance, the managing of disputes, and the weight of compromise. Change has come, not all at once, but steadily reshaping the world. Yet decline does not mean disappearance. Viking influence lingered long after their sails vanished from foreign coasts. Towns they founded, Dublin, York, Kiev, thrived and grew. Trade routes they opened remained vital arteries of commerce. Their descendants carried their legacy forward, whether as kings of England, dukes of Normandy, or settlers in Iceland and Greenland. The Viking Age ended, but the Norse spirit continued, transformed rather than extinguished. The symbolic end of the Viking Age is often placed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. On that September day, the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada led a great force into England, seeking to claim its crown. For a time, the battle swung in his favour, his warriors fighting fiercely, but the English king Harold Godwinson met them with determination, and by day's end, Hardrada lay dead, struck by an arrow to the throat. The Norse army was shattered, its survivors retreating to their ships. Only a fraction returned home. It was a crushing defeat, one that marked the fading of Viking power. Ironically, just weeks later, Harold Godwinson himself would fall to another people of Norse descent, the Normans at the Battle of Hastings. In this moment, the Viking story came full circle. Their age of raiding was over, but their legacy lived on, reshaped in the hands of those who had once been their kin. Picture now the shores of Scandinavia as the 11th century drew to a close. Longships still lay in harbours, but fewer set out for distant raids. Churches rose, where once fires burned for the gods of old. Fields spread wider, settlements grew larger, and the wild energy of the Viking Age softened into something more settled, more rooted. The people of the north remained strong and proud, but they were no longer the restless wanderers of old. As night falls over a Viking farmstead, a family gathers in their longhouse. The fire crackles, casting shadows on the walls. A child listens to a story of Odin and Thor, tales now told more as legend than faith. Outside, the wind sighs through the trees, carrying with it echoes of sails and battles, of journeys across seas. The Viking Age has ended, but its memory endures, not only in sagas and stones, but in the bloodlines, languages, and traditions that still ripple quietly through our world today. The decline of the Vikings was not a sudden fall into silence, but a gentle fading, like the last light of a long northern sunset. Their ships no longer filled the seas, but their influence remained woven into the fabric of Europe. They had come with fire and steel, with trade and stories, with dreams of honour and horizons. And though their age passed, they left behind a legacy that still whispers in the quiet hours of history. The Viking Age may have ended, but the echoes of its people linger still, carried like whispers across time. Imagine a quiet northern shore today. The fjords stretch wide and deep. The forests sigh in the wind, and the same stars that once guided longships glimmer above. Though centuries have passed since dragon-headed vessels cut across the waves, their presence remains woven into the land, into languages, into memory itself. This is the legacy of the Vikings, not only their deeds of war and conquest, but the quieter, enduring threads they left behind. One of the most lasting marks of the Norse is found in language. Across England, place names bear traces of their presence. Towns ending in -by, meaning farm or village, speak of Norse settlers. Thorpe hints at small settlements, while thwaite points to clearings in the forest. Words too remain: sky, egg, window, and husband. All carry Norse roots, everyday reminders of a time when cultures blended and shared. The English tongue today still holds the cadence of Viking voices, quietly enduring in the simplest of phrases. Law and governance also carry their imprint. The Danelaw in England, where Norse customs once ruled, left behind traditions of law that influenced later systems. The Thing, the assembly of free men, echoed into medieval parliaments and democratic ideals. In Iceland, the Althing continues to meet, a direct descendant of Viking assemblies that began over 1,000 years ago. When modern nations gather their citizens in councils and parliaments, they echo, however faintly, the open-air gatherings of Norse farmers beneath the northern sky. In the realm of exploration, the Vikings left a legacy of courage that still inspires. Their voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland stretched the known world, proving that oceans were not barriers but pathways. Long before Columbus crossed the Atlantic, Leif Erikson and his crew had already set foot on North America's shores. Though their settlements did not endure, their daring spirit did. The idea of pushing past horizons, of daring to sail into the unknown, remains a Viking gift to humanity's imagination. Their artistry, too, survives, delicate yet bold. Intricate carvings on wood, bone, and stone reveal spirals of beasts, knots of endless design, and figures drawn from myth. Jewelry of silver and gold, weapons inlaid with pattern, and runestones standing tall in fields, all tell of a people who saw beauty as essential, not separate from life. The Oseberg ship burial, filled with tapestries, carved sledges, and ornate furnishings, reminds us that even in death, the Vikings honored grace and craftsmanship. To look upon these objects today is to glimpse the minds and hands of those long gone, their creativity enduring through centuries. Christianity, though it replaced the Old Norse faith, did not erase the gods entirely. Odin, Thor, and Loki live on in stories retold, in sagas preserved, and even in the days of our week. Thursday for Thor, Wednesday for Odin. These names pass from lips to calendars without pause, reminders of a mythology that once gave courage to men who faced storms at sea and enemies in battle. The myths became legend, and legend became culture, feeding literature, art, and imagination for generations. The Viking legacy is also etched in bloodlines. Genetic studies show their influence spreading across Europe and beyond. Their descendants live not only in Scandinavia, but in the British Isles, Normandy, and further afield. Families carry fragments of Norse ancestry, threads of connection woven invisibly through time. When people today trace their roots and find hints of Viking origin, they rediscover ties to a past both fierce and fascinating. Perhaps the greatest legacy, however, lies in the sagas themselves. Written down in Iceland centuries after the Viking Age, these stories preserve not only deeds of kings and heroes, but also the humour, wisdom, and struggles of ordinary people. They tell of love and betrayal, of voyages and battles, of gods and men caught between fate and freedom. The sagas endure not as dusty relics, but as living tales, read and retold, shaping how we remember the Norse. In their words, the Vikings speak again, their voices carried into the present. Imagine walking through York, Dublin, or Kiev today. Beneath the streets, layers of Norse history lie buried, fragments of pottery, coins, tools, and timber. archaeologists uncover these traces, piecing together lives once lived. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding not only what the Vikings did, but who they were: farmers and warriors, traders and settlers, poets and dreamers. The legacy of the Vikings is not a single story, but a mosaic of countless lives, each thread woven into the fabric of history. The image of the Viking has changed over time. In medieval chronicles, they were monsters, scourges of Christendom. In romantic literature, they became noble savages, fearless adventurers. Today, they are remembered with fascination, their myths adapted in films, novels, and popular culture. Yet behind the exaggerations and stereotypes lies a truth both humbler and richer. The Vikings were human, shaped by their land, their beliefs, and their times. Their legacy endures not in caricatures, but in the quiet persistence of their influence across centuries. As twilight deepens over the north, imagine standing once more on a fjord's edge. The water is calm, the mountains rise dark against the fading sky, and the stars shimmer above, just as they did 1,000 years ago. You might hear, if you listen closely, the ghostly creak of oars, the distant call of voices, the faint hum of a saga carried by the wind. The Vikings are gone, but their presence remains, not as conquerors still at sea, but as memories woven into the world we know. Their age ended, but their legacy endures. In words we speak, in laws we follow, in stories we tell, and in the courage we find when facing horizons unknown. The Vikings remind us that humanity's spirit is restless, always reaching outward, always seeking meaning in both struggle and beauty. They remind us that even in decline, a people can leave behind something timeless, something that whispers across ages. And so, as we close their story, let us remember not only their battles and voyages, but also their families by the hearth, their songs under starlit skies, their dreams of distant lands. For in those dreams lies their truest legacy, the reminder that life is a journey, carried forward by courage, faith, and imagination. And so, our journey through the rise and fall of the Vikings comes to an end. From the rugged northern lands that shaped their spirit, to the myths that guided their courage, from their daring raids and voyages across unknown seas, to their settlements, their families, their kings, and finally their decline, the story of the Norse has flowed like a river through time, leaving ripples that still touch our world today. If you are still awake, let your thoughts drift like mist across the fjords, soft and fleeting. Picture longships at rest in quiet harbours, their sails furled, their warriors asleep beneath the stars. Imagine the crackle of a hearth in a wooden hall, the voices of skalds reciting sagas, the laughter of children playing in the meadows. These echoes of the past linger not to keep us awake, but to cradle us into calm. If your curiosity is still awake alongside you, perhaps you might continue with another of our journeys, to ancient Egypt, to Rome, or to mysteries of long-lost civilizations. Each story, like this one, waits patiently, ready to guide you deeper into rest and wonder. But for now, wherever you are, thank you for listening, for sharing in this quiet passage through time. Until we meet again, may your dreams be gentle, your rest be deep, and your imagination carried softly, like a ship across still waters. Sleep well.